Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to this Naked Mind podcast. So I'm so excited. I have someone who I've been just dying to meet on with me today, and welcome Molly. This is Molly of Breaking Up with Sugar, which this is not the final cover. I was really lucky, and I got an early release copy. And then I made the mistake of starting talking about it because I was so blown away by your book. And everybody's like, where can I get one? Where can I get one? So everybody had to wait, and there was all this pressure. But anyway, now people have it, and it's lived up to all the hype. It's phenomenal. And I can't wait to have this conversation with you today. So welcome. So good to have you here.
I am fanning out. I'm so excited. I'm such a big lover of your work too, Annie. I'm so glad to be here.
That's so awesome. So fun. So I would love to just I know you're probably sick of telling it, but I would love to dig into your story and just kind of hear, all the nitty gritty, where it all started, how it accumulated into this masterpiece that's sitting beside me.
Yeah. Well, I always think about my story. It always feels a little bit divine, because I had all this personal trauma and wreckage, and then my professional life just started to go through it with it. And I always say, I make programs for my sickest self, right? And I write books for my sickest self. Like when I was reading over the book, there would be moments where it was like I was being too new me, and it wasn't speaking to old me. So I always feel really sort of on the other side of it. But yeah, I mean, when I was a little shy of 3, my dad passed away really traumatically and really quickly. And in that, when I figured that out, and I said to my mom, where's dad? And she said, whatever you're supposed to say. It's been told to me, I really turned to sugar immediately, really turned to sugar immediately. And I think that makes all the sense in the world, biochemically and, emotionally. And so, and I was a big bone kid from the beginning. I was 9 pounds, 12 ounces. And so, but then around 7, and I was all about the food, right? We went to the amusement park. I wanted the churros, right? I was over at my friend's Jenny's house. I couldn't get to the Oreos fast enough. So I was just pretty food centric this whole time. And then when I was 7, the adults were worried about me, and they took me to a nutritionist, which I think makes sense, because my behaviors around food were troubling. And, it's funny because I actually remember being in that nutritionist thinking to myself, this is not going to solve my problem. I just want to eat a lot of food.
And how you were 7, you said?
Yeah.
So interesting.
And then, and then I think the story sounds like a lot of people's stories, right? Because it was really my relationship with dieting really started there. And that demoralizing cycle, right? That trauma and drama. And so I would go on a diet, and the diet would inevitably fail me, and demoralization and weight gain and self-hate and all of that. And then I would turn to sugar and feel a little bit better, and then I would go on another diet, get it together again, get that hope and earnestness, and maybe I can do it again, and the diet would fail me. And I never thought that sugar was my problem, because it was really my solution.
Right.
And then my professional path just started to come in. I've always been like this. I knew that nobody was solving my problem, right? And I was going, and we're not talking I've been on 2 diets. There isn't a diet I haven't been on. There isn't a doctor I haven't been to. There isn't a self-help or paid support group. I ate my way through bariatric surgery, right?
Wow.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I'm really the poster child for this thing. So, and, and the whole time, and one of the things that I did when I was 25, I was hired to be the clinical director of a therapeutic boarding school in California. And I was taught very weight loss model, and it was very low fat, calorie counting. Remember those days of honey mustard pretzels and fat-free brownies and Snackwell's cookies. And at that point, it sort of worked for me, because I was in this environment where they were giving me the food, and I was walking a lot, whatever. But so suffice it to say, always somewhere inside of me, I knew that I wanted to find this comprehensive solution to help people. I'm not sure I signed up for the, demoralization and sadness and the path that I would have to take. But on the other side of it, it actually is okay because I've really experienced almost everything you could experience. And so I think that allows me to be helpful to others. But by the end of all of that, and so having eaten through the bariatric surgery, and I'm a trained addictions professional at this point. I'm a trained eating disorders professional. Like to say, doing that work while being an active addict and eating disordered person. Different podcast for a different time, but talk about a shame response, right? Like I'm sitting there trying to help people and going home and binging my brains out, right? I mean, and it's just it's a lot of healing that had to go on in my life after all of that. And and so I was doing this model that I'd been taught at these outpatient clinics I started, and like people weren't getting well. Like some people were, but not in the way that like I knew what needed to happen. But I was not getting well. I was home every night, binging, self-hate, and I was gaining weight hand over fist, which, I am a weight person because I think it has to do with our health. And, I feel better when I weigh a certain thing, but I just didn't think it really looked good to the people I was treating. Also, I was really struggling. And at that point, Robert Lustig was coming out with his Bitter Truth, and just was like low fat was sort of like losing its hype as like as a fad diet. And then my brother, who can't do anything, my little brother quit sugar, and I was like, I was gaining weight hand over fist. It was out of control, and I was like, all right, I'll try it, right? And two things happened, right? Number one, I had detox. And I was like an addictions professional. So I was like, oh boy, I don't think this is just a fad diet. And it's funny, like I knew about diabetes. Like I didn't not know about sugar, right? But those like kind of blind, so I kind of like chose not to because I was protecting sugar with my life. But then the other thing that happened was like, my life started to get much better, much better. My cravings decreased, my skin got better, I was nicer, I could work harder, I slept better, I was taking risks, and I don't, and almost, imperfectly, but pretty perfectly, 10 and a half years later, here I am.
Oh, it's amazing. And I always think that, there's something to be said about the wounded healer, the person, and I guess because I'm in such a similar boat, but like you know the pain, you've been there, you've experienced all the things, and it is, I think, like you said, it's just this divine thing for you to be the one for this.
That calling, that calling that we both have. I was just doing a book signing, and this woman gave me a book and I said, for her daughter, and I said, is your daughter struggling? And she said, yes. And so I just wrote in the book, like, I'm rooting for you. I'm here for you. I believe in you. Let this breakup be your last. And she's like, that's so nice. I was like, that's just my this is all I care. This is all I care about.
Right. It's like such a passion.
Yeah. It's a passion.
One of the things that I really appreciated about your work is you have an incredible way of taking all of these truths about what happens in the brain, and that the response between sugar and alcohol in the brain is almost identical. It's so the same, and people get confused and they think alcohol is sugar and alcohol is not sugar, but the body does process it very similarly, especially from a weight gain perspective. And but you just articulate it in such a profound way where it's like, okay, and there's a reason that it's just really hard to moderate sugar. So I know this in my own life to be true. And it was funny because when I was drinking so much alcohol, sugar wasn't a big thing. It wasn't until after I stopped that my brain is like, no, but we still need this fix. And so here's the next easiest thing. And then it took on a life of its own, right?
Yeah. When I was drinking, though, I did love a lychee martini. So I was always still in the sugar, like I was like finding it literally anywhere I could.
Yeah, I was just a pretty much red wine person. I'd be like red wine at night, coffee in the morning. That was about all I was putting in my body.
Magnums.
You don't drink anymore either, which is another cool aspect.
I am sober from alcohol. I'm sober from sugar. I'm sober from flour. And I have a great life. Like, And there's not, and there's not a minute I would want to go back to any of those three. Not 1 minute of my life.
And so I'm going to ask the question, like, well, what's a treat for you then, Molly?
Oh, life? That's a lie. I mean, but like, I still drink coffee. So somebody told me I should give up coffee, and I almost, snatched their eyes out. I was like, isn't it enough already?
You're like, I'm doing all the things.
Listen, there are delicious things that don't have sugar and flour. I love a good cheddar popcorn from time to time. Love a good natural potato chip, So don't worry about me.
That's awesome.
Find my way.
I love it. I love it. So, what would you, if somebody is really struggling and they're wondering, okay, is sugar the linchpin here? Because I think it is hard to discover. I mean, there's so many things, and I think it's the same with alcohol, where we're like, no, this is my friend. This is actually the duct tape holding it all together. This is not the thing tearing it all apart. Like, what are some questions they can ask themselves, or some things they can start to look at?
I love it. And I think that is always that little trick of the seductor that is sugar and alcohol and these kind of substances that we can get really dependent on. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? I mean, and I remember it so well. And I remember with alcohol, and I remember with sugar, like, what am I going to do when? Like, how will I have a birthday again, right? Like, how will I, and people would tell me that they didn't eat sugar. And I'd be like living in a safari, like, what's that like? Or people tell me whatever. It's like, so, and so I think the book is about breaking up with sugar, right? But it's also really about creating a new relationship with food, which requires us getting rid of like dieting in a huge way, because the only way you can create a relationship with food is if you stop cutting and running from this one to this one to this one to this one, which is culturally such a big piece of the unhealthy relationship that we have with food, is that we can never settle in and get to know who we are and what food goes on. And so I can't say it enough that like the second part of the book is the food plan. And I say at the second part of the book, like, don't stop here, because that's just the diet, right? We need to go into these next chapters to like solidify this relationship that I'm trying to have people have, because lots of people do lots of sugar cleanses, right? Like, so it's really not what I'm selling. I'm really selling recovery here. Like, I'm really selling a new life. And so I think it's very much what you say, right? Because it's really about, what is the relationship like, and does it bother you? Right. So we know these criteria, but if you eat more than you intend to, right. And you say, I swear to God, it's a sliver of a cake. It's what I'm having at the party. And then there's like 2 pieces and some cookies and some this and some this. I mean, to me, there's also this relationship with self that happens and gets transgressed against, right. Because we no longer become trustable when we make promises that we aren't able to keep. And a lot of that is biochemical. A big one these days is like, you go to the doctor and they say, metabolic syndrome, you're close to type 2 diabetes. We need you to watch your sugar. You're having ice cream the next night. There is a craving piece of it. You're sitting in that 3:00 meeting and you're thinking, oh God, can this meeting be over? I want to go get the M&Ms from the vending machine, or she has them on her desk and I want to go get them. Right. And then I think a big one too, which is how you feel after, right? Like feelings of, shame, remorse, regret, and I know for me, because I'm a real end stage in this, in the sugar one, it really hit a lot of the areas of my life. Like, it impacted my friendships and my relationships in a tremendous way, because I stopped going out. I didn't want to be in any pictures. I couldn't fit into things. And so I didn't want to go to concerts. It hit me in all the areas. I mean, in my book in chapter 4, there's a relationship status quiz. So everybody can go take that. And I actually recommend that highly, because it's a spectrum.
Right.
Like, I don't think everybody needs to give up sugar. I actually don't, right? And I know you feel that way too. And I think if you're like me, like I'm a 12 out of 12, I need a pretty big solution for my problem. And if I'm a 1 out of 12, it's like, I don't know. and don't, you know, as I said, smoke them if you got them, you know?
Right. Right. And I think it's so true. I mean, that's like, what is that old saying? Like, you know, if you got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so often we try to approach these things with this like one size fits all approach. And it just doesn't work because, I mean, what everything you just said, what you're talking about is, it is a relationship. It is a level of peace inside yourself with your behavior.
Oh my God.
And
It's
a
like,
level
and
of
I
freedom.
think that's the piece of it that and when you say, what do you do for fun? It's like, I lived in such a destructive relationship with food for so long that ravaged me physically, emotionally, and spiritually that like my life is, I mean, I wake up in the morning, you know, there's West 4th Street. I live in New York City. I walk up these West 4th Street stairs, you know, lost over 175 pounds and kept it off. And it's like, I'm like, oh my goodness. I can't even believe it half the time. You know, I put on the jeans and they fit. I only have like one size of clothing. Like I got like low grade gratitude all the time for this thing because was such a hopeless case.
So you skim over these things that are like these huge bombs, like ate my way through bariatric surgery, lost 175 pounds and kept it off. And it's just like this, like glossy, like these are like, I'm like, holy crap, that's amazing. And I think that that's the message here is like, you can make a change no matter how far you
Absolutely.
feel like you are and how much you've tried before. It
Well,
really is about shifting the entire paradigm of the conversation though, from, okay, I'm going to keep doing all these things that actually, I look at things in two ways. Is it adding to the mental noise and cognitive dissonance and battle inside my head? Like every single diet I've been on, I remember literally being strong-armed by somebody early days. She had read my work and she's like, you have to take my 30-day sugar challenge. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't think about sugar. Like, what if I take it and then I do? And she's like, but I've taught, anyway, I totally was strong-armed into doing
can I
it.
just say something about that, Annie? Because this 30-day, so the thing I really love I love a lot of things about you, but I love that you are a science girl and I'm a science girl too. Like, and so when I wrote this book, I was like, I am going to find the piece of data that tells me when automacy starts, right? With food. And it was 66 days. So when somebody's doing a 30-day sugar challenge, if they really do have this sensitivity, all they're really doing is worsening the sensitivity.
So explain that in a little bit more layman's terms. So
if you're doing, so this is like, so when people are like, there's withdrawal from sugar, I don't know about that. I'm like, well, I bet you if you've experienced withdrawal symptoms, you just go back to sugar so you don't feel the withdrawal symptoms, right? Like that makes sense.
and what are they? What do you
Oh my
feel?
gosh, they're like any drug of choice, right? Their sweats, their exhaustion, their irritabilities, just those are pretty much the big three. Brain fog. Yeah, I slept like a bear for like 20 days. I couldn't stop sleeping. So the problem with it is if you are in this sensitive crew and you're just doing a cleanse, a 7-day cleanse, a 30-day cleanse, you go back. I mean, from an addictions model, I mean, what the addictions model would say is you're actually making your addiction worse, right? Because it's a progressive illness over time. And so you're actually worsening your symptoms by going on and going off. And the thing about issues with sugar, the thing that you're doing, whether or not you believe it's addictive or not, is you are burning out your endocrine system. And there's in my field, in the eating disorders field, there's actually a disbelief in food addiction, like the world is flat. So, but you cannot argue the impact that this consumption of sugar has on your endocrine system, which is kind of where it all happens.
And what does that look like?
When we eat too much sugar, it overproduces insulin in our body, and that leads to a few things. Number one, it leads to your body not being able to process sugar. It leaves sugar in your body, which makes you want more sugar. But my favorite piece of data of all is that when all that excess insulin, it actually attacks your brainstem, and it makes you not be able to feel full. So can you imagine and that resonates with me. I mean, I could eat for days and nonstop and be full and keep eating. And when I learned about that brainstem thing, like my whole life made sense. And the opposite being true, which is I find so many people who I work with here at my clinic, I'm at my clinic right now in New York City, like they're like, I felt full. I stopped. I only ate 3/4 of it. And for a real binge eater, you know, this is like literally the miracles we dream of, right? Like I just had lunch and I was like, oh, I'm done. And still I'm like, see, this is how I have fun, Annie. I'm like, oh my God, 3/4 of my lunch and I'm about to throw it out. This is a miracle of science.
That's amazing.
It's truly my truth.
I love that. So we were talking about this idea of like so how do you, you're listening to this and you're like, because everybody says, oh, I want to stop eating sugar. You know, I mean, everybody kind of, that's very trendy right now. Everybody's kind of on this, like, you know, but
it's January, you know.
Yeah, it's January. Everybody's in this, you know, new year, new you, all this stuff. And so how do you, like, for me, when I'm thinking of, okay, when someone says, how do I really tell if I have a problem with alcohol? That's like one of the most, you know, typical questions. And I'm like, how free do you feel? How much are you thinking about it? I love this comparison I make, which is basically in the alcohol experiment, which is this idea of, you know, fixation versus what was the word I use? Like just basically liberty. Like, how does it feel? Like if you walk in somewhere, is your first thoughts like, okay, where's the bar, or where's the cupcakes, or what do they have to eat? Or is your first thought, who's here? And then how much of your brain space is being taken up by this either food or alcohol or whatever else you're fixated in, or can't wait to get out of this situation so you can get, I mean, I felt this with certain TV series where, you know, the feeling, you've binged on a TV series, then you have to go to work for 8 hours, and the whole day you're kind of like counting the out, you know what I mean? It can happen with anything, but then the brain gets really fixated. And
I think we can I think with alcohol too, but certainly with food, there's just such an accepted piece of this overeating being like a, you know, like a normal thing, right? Like we binge, and even if you watch TV, it's like, I was watching 30 Rock last night, and it's like, there's just so many jokes about Liz Lemon eating 6 donuts, right? And I was like, I just watch it sometimes, and I'm like, wow, like it's sort of culturally accepted that we binge. It's culturally accepted that we restrict. It's like eating disorders are in many ways like very culturally accepted. And I agree with you. I mean, when I treat people, I talk about noise. Like they'll be talking to me and I'll be like, oh my God, that is just so noisy, right? One of my clients came in yesterday. He said, well, I think I want to do intermittent fasting. I want to do an 18-6 because like, you know, then I don't have to eat. I'm like, oh my God, my head hurts. Like there's such a more peaceful way to live with food. You don't have to be so scared of it. Like there's a whole different way that we can live. But that is part of the divorcing dieting too, right? And because food is a substance you have to use. And I agree. By the way, I subscribe to this with, you know, this is sort of the harm reduction concept in substance use is the necessary thing that you have to treat with food. And, you know, what I say to people is there is not a question if you're going to mess this up. You're definitely going to mess it up with the food. But the way the diet culture has us messing up with the food is, as I say this in the book, it's like we get a flat tire in our car and we get out of our car and we slash all 4 tires and we torch our car and we leave it in the middle of the highway, mic drop, you know, until the next time we can afford to buy a car. And that's how we behave with food. And if we behaved like that with any other relationship in our life, we would have no relationships. I don't shut down the clinic if I have a hard day, right? I don't end my best friendship if we get in a fight. But with the food, it's like we have a half of a cookie and it's like, oh, okay, that's done. And that impacts the relationship with self. So answering this question of, you know, is it a problem? I mean, I think the solution set is just, it's so vast. It's like what you're saying. The solution set is so vast. And diet culture has us believing that it's a black and white issue, right? And it is so far from that, especially with the food. And I think there's a piece of self-forgiveness that comes when you really get into relationship with food and you make an error and you self-correct and you get curious about what happened and you learn about yourself. I mean, it's really powerful stuff if you can sort of brainwash yourself out of diet culture. So to me, like, breaking up with sugar in and of itself is not sufficient in creating a healthy relationship with food by any means. It's a diet.
Right. And how would you take, just for listeners, like this idea of, okay, there's a food plan, not eating sugar and flour, but it's not a diet. Like, talk me through what.
My friend just texted me about this morning. She was, that looks like a diet. Like, I was like, Melissa, I know, I'm so sorry. But and I agree. I mean, and I write this in the book, like, you know, we call her morbidly obese Molly, read that too. And she was like, oh, no. Don't you tell me to weigh and measure my food. Like, don't you tell me. But here's the problem. And I think this is just like, this is the whole thing. Like, right, like, it looks like a diet to me. It's like, I found in my experience in recovery that that the boundaries are really where I find the freedom, right? And my favorite piece of data is the data on self-determination. Says really clearly that when we determine that we are going to do this for ourselves, that's when change really sits. But most people who are reading this book have kind of destroyed their relationship with food. And so we need to get some foundation back. Right? Like, there's been an earthquake, you know, and so we got to rebuild. And the way we rebuild that is by all evidence-based stuff, right? By getting structure around when you eat, by getting structure around what you eat, by getting structure about how much you eat, right? Side note, hardcore harm reductionist. First of all, whole chapter on the book, what to do when you don't want to do what you know what you're supposed to do, right? Like, we got to know, because going back to sugar makes it chemical. We don't want to do that. There's all sorts of other things, you know, that you can do. And number two, whole chapter in the book on what I call humble eating, which is on figuring out your version of this after you've done it for a while. I think that is essential. I had chickpea mac and cheese last night because I can handle it 10 years in. It was see, that's how I enjoy myself, Annie. There's another thing I do for fun. I had my brother over for chickpea mac and cheese. It was heavenly.
That's awesome. I love that. So it's like, and it is true, like, freedom does come in boundaries and rules, because it's this idea of like a firm decision. Like, when you've decided something, when you've committed to something, there's so much freedom.
Praise. That's it. And that's what I found in all of my recovery. In the beginning, it's not like a patriarchal sort of thing, but in the beginning, I didn't have my mind back yet. I didn't have my wisdom back yet. It was sort of in the ICU, you know, and as I healed, my own internal wisdom came back. My decision-making got more solid, right? Because I'm not saying intuitive eating, because today, if you said, what intuitively do you want? I'd be like, cookie dough, always. I always want cookie dough. But if you say humbly, Molly, knowing what works for you, knowing what doesn't, what do you want to have for dinner tonight? I'd be like, I think I want a Mediterranean, you know, like, that sounds like, or some sushi or something, you know. So there's a real difference in intuitive eating versus humble eating, because humble eating makes an assumption that you know what works and what doesn't for you, and you humbly accept that, you know.
Yeah, I love this idea of just like, know what you can't screw around with. Like, the sooner you know what you can't screw around with, the sooner your life just gets way better.
In fairness with the food, sometimes I have to go redo that data, you know.
Yeah, right. But that's part of being really mindful about it, is like, you're going to redo it in a way that's like, okay, well,
right.
Has it changed? Has it shifted?
Yeah,
allowing
love that. Yeah. Usually no over here, but still can't have kind bars. Okay. Sounds good.
And so that's another question, I guess, that I think people are curious about, is like, I know for me, when I try to not eat very much sugar at all, but like, it is really everywhere. So if you're,
it is real. I have this like Facebook group, and they're like, with the bacon and with it's so in the yogurt, it's literally in everything. And the book does talk about flour too. So bring cornstarch into that. I mean, starch, it's just, And listen, I mean, there's a lot of people, well, actually not a lot of people, but there's a small amount of people making a lot of money off of adding that in ingredients that in places you never thought it would have. I mean, that's sort of what the epidemic is about anyway, is that it's just everywhere now. It's not 19.
Yeah, I remember trying to buy bacon. That's a perfect.
It's like almost impossible.
It was like even at Vitamin Cottage or Natural Grocers,
Right.
what people have everywhere they are, but basically a health food store, it was difficult to find a bacon that didn't have sugar added. And so how does that work in the body? You know, because I'm sure that unknowingly, you know, because it is hard to be hypervigilant when you're traveling or when you're something else. And like, do you have any tips for that? Or is it more of a...
So two things. So first of all, I am, I'm a therapist by trade. Like, so I'm a trained addictions and eating disorders therapist, and I'm not a nutritionist. And so I wrote this book with a nutritionist. Like, I wrote the food plan with my dear friend, Nikki, who's one of like 3 nutritionists that believes in food addiction. So Nikki has this rule. It's really a great rule, because here's the thing. There is a very rigid belief system. Some people with food addiction, you need to bring your scale everywhere. You can't have salt. You can't have, it's like, I mean, literally, like, the defiance in me as I even say this, she was like, let's just go have cupcakes. Like, you know, the abstinence violation, like, talking about it. So to me, it's like, we got to find this middle path, because when you do, if you really do have the problem and you get into the solution, you really know it, right? Because it's like going from seeing black and white to seeing color. And you and I both know that, right? But with the food, it's like, if you're living a big, beautiful life, it's very unlikely you're going to eat all your food at home, and you're never going to have to get something on the go. And that, you know, and I want this to be doable and tenable. So the 2 things, number 1, we made this thing called the 5th ingredient rule. So if sugar or flour is the 5th ingredient or less, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the food's good to go. Now, I've had people like find frozen yogurt with it, and I'm like, you know, spirit of the law, we shouldn't be eating frozen yogurt. Okay, you do what you want to do. Sorry, I didn't mean that. But you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But number 2 is like, cravings aren't commands. So, you know, I had some white rice sushi that was sugar filled. I was absolutely triggered, but I didn't have to go eat more. I just had a feeling, a biochemical reaction and a feeling that I wanted more. It doesn't mean I have to go have more. So I think both of those 2 things help to secure freedom. And I want people to be able to have freedom in a really big way. I want them to travel and go out to dinner and not plan sometimes because their life got too big and they forgot, and not have to go slice all the tires, right? Like, we really want, because for a lot of people, food is, in my experience, you know, I talk to people about their food problems. They start like when mine did, well, not when mine did, but like 7. I mean, I'm talking to people about decades and decades and decades of this thing. And it's like, enough already.
And how do you think, and you may not know the answer to this, but I have 3 kids, and they all 3 they're raised in the same house, you know, same parents, but they treat sugar very differently. My oldest one, he is kind of a take it or leave it. My middle child, if he gets deprived somehow of, you know, what he thinks he should, I mean, it's, if you were to leave him alone with Halloween candy, he wouldn't come out until he was sick, you know, and they just have very different attraction to the substance.
I think it's, I say this in the book. I mean, I think biodiversity is like the most fascinating part of like the human nature. But I think it's why, I mean, when someone tells you one way, run away, right? I mean, it's what I love about your writing. You know, it's like, we cannot sit here and say that one thing works for all people. It's just, it's crazy. And we always have to take into account the nature of the substance, the nature of the environment, and then the nature of the person, right? And even though they both have the same parents, like, there's just so many factors that go into sensitivity to this stuff, emotional, biological, spiritual. I know, it's pretty nuts, isn't it?
One of the things that I just really appreciated about Breaking Up with Sugar, the book, is like the education first, you know, like really saying, okay, like, treat you as an adult. I want you to know what's happening.
Yeah. I want people to be as smart as me. I always say that at my clinic. I'm always like, because I think that's true with the food, especially because you know, I work on East 44th Street. You pass 3 bodegas by the time you get to my office. Come over anytime, Annie. But great, we have so much fun. So I think the stimulation with the food, your brain's got to be like doctorate level about this. And that's why I wanted to get that information to people in a way that was really palatable, no pun intended. And it's not too sciencey, like not that would want their brains to explode. Be like, oh, okay, yeah, that does make sense to me.
And I think one of the most important things is like, so if we're looking at maybe like, you know, a scale of like the cravings, the physical aspect, the habitual behaviors, that everything's been done before, all the beliefs about it's not going to work. And then we're looking at this other thing, and we keep adding to the other side of this, the facts, the education, the education. It really can like shift your entire life. But in order for that conversation even to happen.
Do you know this piece of research? I feel like you should know this. I'm sure you do. But do you know how many times this is drugs and alcohol, how many times somebody attempts to quit drugs and alcohol before they do it successfully? 8 to 13 times. With drugs, with an abstinent. So 3 strikes and you're out. 3 strikes, you're just getting started. Like, you know, like that belief. And with the food, it's like, I think you could add zeros. I think it's probably 80 to 100. You just never, I've been in addiction service my whole life. You never know which one's going to work. That's the truth of it.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's so interesting. No, I didn't know that. I'll have to get the source.
It's very exciting to me. I'll get it for you. But that's the idea that I've added research to your life is like, that's great.
No, that's great. I had no idea. And I think that when we're adding these facts, like, but I think the problem is that we are not open to the facts when we make them mean something negative about ourselves, when we're using the weapons of blame and shame. So you literally can overcome, in my belief, anything by just putting the good information in your brain so you actually change your desire. So you don't want the sugar anymore, so that chickpea mac and cheese is your treat, so that you're living your best life. You're living with this low level gratitude. You're in like the zone. But that comes with the change of desire, and the change of desire comes with all the education and knowledge, which our brains are just hungry for. But we're resistant to all of that when we're still living in the shame and the blame and the guilt.
And I think there's a piece too, and this is literally that second chapter of my book talks about commitment, talks about staying the course. Marshall Linehan, who's one of my teachers of dialectical behavior therapy, she says, you know, motivation waxes and wanes, right? But our commitment needs to be kind of permanent. And so, you know, I think after 66 days, you know, your brain really does get some automacy. And if you can start to reframe this idea of, you know, the ebbs and flows of all relationships and start to really reframe this, we decrease blame and shame, right? Because we're doing the vulnerability dance, which is great. And we're sort of looking at it differently. And I just think if you make a commitment that you're just going to be in this thing, you can't mess it up.
Yeah.
You can't mess it up. It's impossible. It's impossible.
Right. Like, it's so cliche.
Totally reframing this diet thing. I mean, nobody in January is saying what I'm saying.
Right.
They're all like, oh, we're going to fix it right now. Feb 1, you're done. I'm like, oh, that's a lie.
Yeah.
So
no, basically the path is to stumble and stumble and stumble and stumble and stumble and just get very much closer to.
So unsexy. I'm like, no, this is a long-term relationship. Everyone's like, no. I want a quick fix, quick affair, please. No, Molly.
Yeah.
But there's so much peace here. I mean, you have to be in a relationship with food. There's no out.
Yeah. And I mean, I know for me, like my relationship with food really changed 2.5 years ago because I just had some weird gut issues after the birth, and I started to see a naturopath, and I went and had a blood test, and like many people came back that like there are certain things that just I can't eat. And at first, like this idea of like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be, I remember making so much fun of my mother for not eating gluten. Like it was literally like a pastime of mine. Right. And then suddenly here's like the black and white blood test saying that it inflames my gut and will give me the stomach pain that I've been experiencing. I'm like, this is crap. And now, you know, I went from something, and it is to that automatic response, the automacy that you're talking about. Like it's I went from something that I was not only so resistant to, but now it's like, it's not even on my radar. It's not even something I would consider would be to eat gluten. Like why would I ever do that? And I don't miss it, and I don't feel deprived, and like,
but I think that's always fine with things that we are dependent and judgmental. I was like that with meditation. My stepfather's this big meditator, and I was like, oh, never me, you know, until I hit a bottom, and I was like, can you teach me meditate? And now I'm like a devoted meditator. It's like, I just don't always, I don't know if this is the right way to say, but I think that sometimes my reactive thought is so deeply rooted in protecting me accidentally, like I'm always a hard no. So I always let that first thought kind of go past. Like, it's an interesting idea. What else do you have to share, Molly?
I love that. And yeah, so at the crux of it, it is becoming really aware of your thinking about whatever it is, because you can't, if you're not, you have to examine all of those negative thoughts and all of the thoughts that are just, like you say, the noise that's coming. And, your brain has all these solutions. It's going to fix it this way or that way in order to actually create enough space for the education and the mindset shift. And so like, in this Naked Mind, like, I've taken the book and I've created an institute where I'm teaching other coaches. And that was like a mind bending thing, because I was like, okay, how do I take what was just narrative for me and actually create like methodology, right? And really the crux of it was, it's a path. So it's pause, act, transform, and hone. I always like it to be a little memorable thing, but the pause is about putting down the weapons of blame and shame and creating the space. And actually, like in my journey, I stopped trying to stop drinking. That's how I got off the alcohol diet mentalities. I stopped trying to stop. And I said, you know what, I'm going to stop this. And I'm just going to accept that there's an answer, but it's not in what I've been doing. And it's certainly not in this cycle.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pause and I'm going to learn. And then once I had enough of that kind of education piling up, the desire to make a different choice fueled me through.
I also think creating curiosity around, so at least for me, it's like I got such shame around lapsing, and what I do here, a lot of the work we do here is doing an analysis. Like, it's like an exciting thing. We can learn so much, and really understanding what my vulnerabilities were. Right. It's like, and I didn't even know, because I was so like blacked out. I couldn't even think the shame was so deep, but it's like, I didn't even know I couldn't go out to dinner with my friend Karen because she was a food pusher, or I didn't know that like when it's really cold out, I'm more vulnerable to eat like little teeny things that you have no idea about. Right. Or if I'm angry, I really need to have my food plan because I'm more vulnerable to going off plan. It's just these little things, and they're so empowering. And because I think that when you heal the relationship with food, you inevitably heal your relationship with self, and you get to know yourself better. Like, I was never one of these people that thought I would even like myself. I was suicidal a lot of my life. It was very like loose relationship with life, and through behavior mostly, right? Through esteemable, loving, kind of thoughtful behavior, I transformed this relationship with myself. It's like an added bonus. I just didn't want to be so in bed with food all the time. But what has happened to my relationship with myself is like, wow. And so many people I treat this one guy, Ben, and he was one of those people, and he would walk around the streets and say, how are people happy? Like, how are people, because he just wanted to diet all the time, 350 pounds, tried everything. And this is what I mean about you never know which time's going to work. Because I don't know how. I said to him, can you suspend your belief for a minute? I mean, I say that a lot of times in the 15 years I've been doing this, and he said yes, and he's better now. And he is in life, new job, new girl, new, all upgrade, and this is what happens when we just take a minute. Is that one of my business advisors always says this thing to me, Molly, is it true or do you think it's true? And usually in those conversations, it's like, well, Scott, I think it's true,
Right.
As it turns out, And I think we got to do that. And you talk about this so much in your book, but I think we have to really be clear and sort of be able to sign on the dotted line. Like, I will agree that this belief is true. And with food, it is, because it's such a crooked path, so many of our beliefs that we are really abiding by, like it is the Constitution, are just wrong.
Right. I remember I had a conversation recently with someone who's like, I didn't even realize my beliefs wouldn't be true. And I think that's where a lot of us start, is like, well, I believe it. Of course it's true.
So it is.
Yeah. So that
like, well, let's change that, right? Like, just change that belief. What if it was? I know someone's like, oh, I'm just a failure. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. I literally said this first thing. Your definition of that and my definition of that are like probably really far off. I also don't believe in it. So explain that to me. And as we unpack that idea of I'm a failure, she's like, oh God, what was I doing here? And I'm like, spending 20 years on really fake news, like not good.
I love like what you're painting, what you're talking about, and what I think, taking a look at this through your methodology can really deliver is this idea of what you think is such a big deal right now. For me, it was like French bread. I was gonna, oh my God, like never, right? And or cupcakes or cookie dough, like they just feel like, how am I gonna make Christmas cookies with my kids? How is that actually gonna work?
I know.
What you trade it and you look back and you say, that was so small compared to all this, because everything opens up and everything unlocks.
One of my clients was saying this to me yesterday, Gail, because she's now in it. And she said, I remember so profoundly my first Thanksgiving, I said to you, Molly, what are you going to eat on Thanksgiving? And she said, and you looked at me and you said, I don't know, some turkey, a potato, some vegetables. And she's like, and I didn't get it. But you had done it so many times that you were like, to me, Thanksgiving, I just call it Thursday. Like, it's Thursday dinner, I'm going to go have some dinner. Before, I think that's also the bind, that the hold, that's a biochemical hold a little bit, right? Like, I cannot live without you. I can never live. I remember when I quit drinking and I said to my friend, was considering it. Maybe I was like on day 3. And I said to my friend, Shoshana, like, what happens when I go to Italy? And she says, oh my God, do you have a trip to Italy? And I was like, no, but what happens if I want to go to Italy? And I've been to Italy and I've been to Paris and it's like so much better, but it's really hard to believe that when you're trapped in the thing. I've gone to those places, no sugar, no flour, no drinking. Great times.
Yeah. Yeah. So amazing. Better times. It's just
better is like an understatement of a word.
Yeah.
And I'm not that fun when I'm eating and drinking those things. I'm like a really bad time. I'm really depressed.
When we're like all in our own heads about all this stuff, when we're like, the brain can be actually a fun place when you can clear out all the, the noise, as you say. So
beautiful and fascinating. And I'm really fun. I'm a really fun person, kind of straight, so as it turns out, I had no idea. I learned that very recently, last 10 years,
Well, Molly, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. So where can people find you? Where can they get your book? Can they learn more about you if they're in New York City?
Well, so I have this brand new website, mollycarmel.com. On this website, they're for free. There's this thing called the anti-perfection plan. Because this is what I think is the real thing after we give up sugar. We have to learn alternatives to being perfect, not to slash all 4 tires. And so that's for free up there. And I do Facebook Lives and Instagram Lives on 9 p.m. on Sunday nights. I'm all about, like you are, like building this community because it's hard to find like-minded people. And, we've got to stay connected through this. It's so important.
So important. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been an awesome conversation, as I knew it would be, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Have you tried the alcohol experiment? Okay, if not, drop everything and go to thisnakedmind.com/experiment. This free 30-day challenge is designed to interrupt your patterns and put you back in touch with the best version of you. You remember it was that version of you that's living your most joyful life, the version that doesn't need alcohol to relax or to have a good time and is having more fun than ever. And again, this is a totally free challenge that will change everything for you. So learn more and join me 100% free at thisnakedmind.com/experiment. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as it truly helps the message reach somebody who might need to hear it today.